Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you an incredible and chilling story. We will meet Nun Everly Sterling, who faced death in a near-death experience and returned with a shocking and urgent message about the future of faith. What she saw, on the other side, will leave you speechless and completely transform your vision of the spiritual. So, before we start, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to receive all notifications, because this intense and surprising journey will shake your beliefs. From a very young age, the flame of faith ignited in me a feeling so deep that it seemed to mark every beat of my heart. I grew up surrounded by hymns and prayers, where each dawn was greeted with the certainty that the divine was calling me to a greater destiny. I clearly remember the long mornings when, still surrounded by the silence of the early morning, my prayers mingled with the soft sound of the wind that swayed the convent's trees. At that time, every sacred word spoken in the language of devotion was a silent promise of surrender and love. One morning, as the first rays of the sun peeked shyly over the horizon, I felt the welcoming weight of the mission that stretched beyond human understanding. "Everly, my angel, this is the beginning of a journey that transcends time," whispered the soft voice of my mentor, who had become like a second mother to me. His eyes, full of tenderness and wisdom, reflected the same passion that I had harbored since I was a child. At his side, I learned that the divine call was not a mere convention but a living experience that revealed itself in the silence of prayer and the simplicity of gestures of compassion. Walking through the cold stone corridors of the convent, my every step resonated with the certainty that devotion was the path to redemption. In moments of solitary meditation, my prayers became intimate dialogues with the sky, where I shared my doubts, hopes, and fears, as if the universe itself listened to me in a comforting embrace. "Faith, dear Everly, is the compass that guides us even in the darkest nights," said my mentor's voice, encouraging me to persevere. These moments of pure surrender, filled with rituals and silent prayers, were the foundation of a lifetime of service and devotion. Every gesture, every word of love offered to those in need, was a silent proof of the commitment that sealed my soul. The sense of urgency began to settle like a silent shadow in the midst of my daily prayers. I, Everly, felt that something was not in harmony, an invisible weight that lodged itself in every beat of my heart, as if a storm was about to break over my soul. On a particularly silent night, as I stood alone in the convent's small chapel, the words of the liturgy seemed to echo with a different tone, darker and full of foreboding. During the prayer, I noticed a tightness in my chest, a pressure that was not part of the usual ritual but that insisted on drawing my attention. My hands began to shake slightly, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow down, leaving me caught in a threshold between the familiar and the unknown. In the midst of this restlessness, I remembered the words of my mentor, who always encouraged me to trust the inner voice of the divine, even when reason wavered. I felt a mixture of fear and fascination as I wondered if this was a sign of an impending ordeal or a harbinger of something greater, something that defied our very understanding of the limits of existence. The urgency that dominated me was like a silent cry that whispered in the deepest recesses of my soul, warning me that the routine of prayers was no longer enough to quench the thirst for something transcendent. I walked slowly through the cold corridors of the convent with teary eyes, while each shadow seemed to hold a mystery, each echo of footsteps, a hidden secret. In the midst of this whirlwind of emotions, I sought refuge in ancient manuscripts that reported mystical experiences, trying to decipher the enigma that consumed me. The anxiety of understanding the origin of that omen dominated me, and even though the answer remained hidden, I knew I needed to be prepared for whatever was announced. This feeling was not a mere whim of fate, but an urgent call to transcend sameness and dive headlong into the immensity of the divine, even if it meant facing my own fears. The intensity of the prayers multiplied every day, as if the air itself carried a charge of hope and despair. I found myself almost compulsively in the chapel after collective celebrations, where silence became the ideal stage for the cry of my soul. As I knelt before the altar, I felt the tears silently flowing, and an inner voice urged me, "Everly, it's time to go further, to plead for those who are losing their way." On one of these nights, while I was praying fervently, I heard soft footsteps approaching. It was Olivia Monroe, a young novice with bright, determined eyes, who whispered, "Sister Everly, I feel this urgency too, as if the divine is calling us to save what remains." His words, full of innocence and faith, echoed in my heart, reinforcing the conviction that we were not alone in this fight. Together, we spent hours in prayer, our voices intertwining in a hymn of supplication, calling for the restoration of the light that, little by little, seemed to fade within the sacred walls. In the midst of this silent dialogue with heaven, I remembered the warnings that my mentor always mentioned, the importance of not only praying for ourselves, but also for those who, in some way, had strayed from the true path of faith. The convent, with its ancient corridors, seemed to whisper stories of a glorious past, but it also revealed, within its cold walls, signs of abandonment and uncertainty. During one of these moments of intense prayer, I heard the distant echo of the voice of James Carter, our spiritual leader, as he passed, murmuring words of encouragement but also of despair. "The light still resists, even if weak," he said, without looking up from his sacred writings. This exchange of feelings and words, between the silence of devotion and the murmur of those who worried about spiritual decline, meant that each prayer became an act of resistance. It was as if we were forming a silent pact, where each word of supplication became a shield against the darkness that threatened to swallow our faith. During a night when the chapel seemed particularly silent, immersed in the dim light of flickering candles, I was surprised by a sudden and overwhelming discomfort. As I was immersed in my prayers, a sharp pressure began to tighten my chest, as if invisible hands wanted to silence my breathing. In an instant of pure helplessness, the vision around me became blurred, sounds distorted, and I felt cold sweat running down my forehead. "God, help me," I murmured, but the plea was lost in a vacuum that seemed to swallow all hope. My legs weakened, and in the blink of an eye I felt myself disappearing, as if my body, the faithful depository of my soul, refused to bear such intensity any longer. In a state between consciousness and oblivion, I saw, with the strangeness of a spectator, my inert figure lying on the sacred floor of the chapel, while a part of me floated, detached from the physical form. There was no terror but a surreal calm that enveloped me, as if eternity itself was welcoming me. Amidst this threshold between life and what lies beyond, a soft, comforting voice echoed, "Everly, fear not, for this is but a glimpse of what awaits you." The sensation was so vivid that even in the uncertainty of fainting I could perceive a silent dialogue between my essence and the divine. "Why do you let me see such a truth?" I questioned in an ethereal whisper, but the answer came in the form of a silence full of meaning, which urged me to accept what was to come. As my being floated in a space where time seemed to dissolve, reality fragmented into memories and promises of a future filled with purpose. The intensity of that moment, mixed with the feeling of liberation, delineated the fine line between earthly pain and heavenly peace. Every beat of my heart, even if distant, reminded me that there was still a mission to accomplish, a message to be transmitted. The environment, once so familiar, had transformed into a stage of revelations, where every shadow and every light carried the weight of an inescapable truth. The experience, although painful, lit a flame of understanding in me, which promised not only to resurrect faith but also to reveal the hidden mysteries behind the decline that was plaguing our institution. As my consciousness roamed freely, detached from my body, I felt a strange sense of lightness and serenity that I had never experienced. In this liminal space where time seemed to disappear and the boundaries between the real and the ethereal blurred, I heard a soft voice that seemed to come from within me. "Everly, allow yourself to float. Absorb every fragment of this moment," whispered the presence that, although distant, radiated a comforting warmth. I saw myself from an unknown perspective, hovering over the chapel, observing the familiar contours of the place with the eyes of someone who sees the world through another lens. In the midst of this trance, I remembered fragments of the prayers that had always echoed in my life, as if each sacred word had prepared me for this moment of transition. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft sound of my memories and the throb of new hope. I never imagined that separation from matter could be so liberating, I thought, marveling at the sensation of floating untethered. In a moment of startling clarity, I saw my body resting on the floor of the chapel, a symbol of everything I was leaving behind. Despite being far away, a part of me remained deeply connected to that space, as if the sacred temple itself continued to pulse and sync with my soul. There's so much to learn here, beyond what the eye can see, I murmured, absorbing every detail of the environment transformed by light and shadow. The transition was marked by a smoothness that defied earthly logic. I was dialoguing with the essence of the universe, responding to silent messages with an acceptance I had never felt. I know that what I am experiencing is part of a greater design, I whispered through the whirlwind of sensations, as every piece of my memory merged with the gift of a new awakening. The physical world seemed distant, but the energy that pulsed within me announced that my journey was just beginning, and that, at that very moment, I was being shaped to embrace a mission that surpassed the common understanding of existence. At that moment when the mystical experience reached its peak, intense visions began to unfold before my eyes, as if the veil of time was opening to reveal the hidden secrets of the sacred. I saw, with an almost painful clarity, scenes of temples and chapels where faith boiled intensely, where the faithful gathered in communion with a vibrant and irreverent energy. However, these images were soon mixed with scenes of abandonment, empty corridors, dusty benches, and forgotten altars that cried out for urgent renovation. Amid this contrast, I heard Olivia's soft voice, which seemed to echo from somewhere beyond my consciousness. "Everly, see how light and darkness fight for dominance, how hope hides in the midst of despair," she said, as her words intertwined with the images that emerged. These visions were not merely static, they moved, pulsated with the energy of the divine and the profane, transforming into a spectacle that denounced both decline and the possibility of redemption. In one of those moments, I noticed a silent battle, where prayers became luminous shields, erecting barriers against invisible forces that threatened to corrode the faith of the faithful. I saw religious leaders like James immersed in internal conflicts, fighting shadows that crept into their hearts. "The light resists, even if fragile," murmured a distant voice, filled with melancholy and hope, as the contours of the images fell apart, revealing the complex dance between decay and spiritual rebirth. As I took in every detail, I felt a deep heaviness mixed with a spark of optimism. I understood that renewal would not come from an abrupt transformation, but from a return to the roots of devotion, from a rekindling of the inner flame that, even though weakened, continued to burn. This vision convinced me that the institution, although marked by the wear and tear of time, still had the capacity to be reborn through the fervor of the faithful and conscious leadership. The images slowly faded away, but the message remained alive in my heart. It was urgent to restore the connection with the divine, strengthen faith, and rebuild the foundations of the community. As the visions dissipated, a more concrete image began to form, revealing the figure of James Carter, our spiritual leader, whose presence had always been marked by serene strength and the burden of immeasurable responsibilities. In the midst of a collective prayer, I could see the tired and anguished look he was looking at the horizon. I clearly remember a whispered, barely audible conversation as we walked through the cold corridors of the convent. "Everly, every decision weighs like a cross on my chest. I see shadows creeping into the faith we swore to protect, and it destroys me inside," James confided, with a voice that mixed tiredness and deep concern. His words resonated like a lament, revealing not only personal anguish, but also the internal struggle that threatened his ability to lead. In their eyes, I saw the reflection of countless dilemmas: the responsibility of guiding a community thirsty for hope, the need to keep the flame of devotion burning, and at the same time, face the internal demons that corroded the essence of our institution. On a silent afternoon, as the sun set behind the convent's Gothic windows, James and I stood on a weathered wooden bench, immersed in an emotionally charged dialogue. I feel like with every prayer the battle intensifies. It's not just what we face out there, but the silent erosion that invades our hearts, he said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I held his hand in a gesture of solidarity, feeling that, despite the weight of responsibility, faith could still be renewed if we fought together against this tide of discouragement. The surrounding environment seemed to bear witness to this silent confrontation between despair and hope, where every word exchanged served as a reminder that true leadership required courage to face both external challenges and one's own weaknesses. That afternoon remained etched in my memory, symbolizing the eternal dilemma of carrying the burden of being a spiritual guide and the constant effort of keeping faith alive, even when everything seemed to be falling apart around me. In the blink of an eye, the darkness gave way to an unexpected flash, and I felt a force that brought me back to my body with the urgency of a second chance. I woke up in a hospital bed, wrapped in white sheets that contrasted with the shadows of my experience. The atmosphere was serene, but every heartbeat seemed to scream the revelation of what had happened. Beside me, a nurse murmured words of relief as I struggled to understand the depth of what I had experienced. "You're back, Everly. The divine presence has brought you back to fulfill your mission," she said in an almost sacred voice, which resonated in my soul like a call. Confused but feeling a transformation in every fiber of my being, I remembered the words that echoed throughout my liminal state. The message that my journey had not yet come to an end. Amid the lightness of the sheets and the stillness of the devices around me, I realized that this return was not the result of chance, but rather a clear sign that I should share the testimony of what I experienced. I sat on the edge of the bed, my eyes shining with renewed determination, and began to write down every detail of that mystical encounter. "Prayer is the key, and time is short," I repeated mentally, like a mantra that drove me forward. While talking to the doctor, who showed both astonishment and respect for the report that for many might sound unbelievable, I tried to put into words the grandeur of that awakening. I feel like I was touched by something bigger than ourselves, something that calls us to restore our faith and rekindle our inner light, I confessed, my voice choked with emotion. This experience, so intimate and transformative, became the fuel for a greater calling, to be the voice that will carry the message of renewal to all who, like me, once felt lost in darkness. Every word he wrote was a reminder that, even in the face of death, hope is reborn, and testimony becomes a beacon to guide other afflicted hearts. Now, with my heart still beating with the energy of my experience, I felt that the mission entrusted to me was not just a personal calling, but a sacred responsibility to the entire community. Walking through the corridors of the convent, where every stone seemed to hold secrets of devotion, I found myself accompanied by Olivia, Alexander, and Madison, each of them reflecting a fragment of the faith I sought to restore. On a gray afternoon, as the wind whispered through the ancient slits of the window, Olivia approached, her eyes filled with hope, and said, "Everly, believe me, our union can rekindle the flame that once lit this place." Alexander, always reserved, agreed with a silent nod, and Madison, in her calm voice, added, "Together we can turn the darkness into light, rebuilding the faith that so many have lost." Each word echoed in my soul, reaffirming that the true power of prayer resided in its ability to unite hearts and transform reality. At that moment, I realized that the restoration would not just be a return to ancient practices, but the creation of a new tradition, where sincerity and love prevailed over the remnants of discouragement. As I guided my companions through intense prayers and profound dialogues, I felt that the essence of faith was manifested in simple gestures, a look, a touch, a murmur of gratitude. The message that was forming in my spirit was clear. Time is short, and prayer is the key to opening the doors of redemption. And so, under the blessing of a faint light that filtered through the window, we gathered our strength and promised to rebuild not only the foundations of the convent, but also the hearts of the faithful. Every prayer, every gesture of compassion was a step toward a spiritual rebirth that could not be delayed. I felt deeply that the universe was conspiring in our favor, and that faith, when true, never extinguishes, but transforms and flourishes. As the shadows of doubt and despair dissipated in the light of a new beginning, I felt in every fiber of my being the call to rebuild the faith that seemed to be lost. I led my companions, James, whose soul bore the burden of difficult decisions, Olivia, who radiated hope in her gestures, Alexander, with his introspection that reflected hidden truth, and Madison, whose serenity recalled reason in the midst of the storm, among the hallowed halls and pulsating streets of this historic city. Together, we walked a path where each prayer turned into a firm step towards redemption. The old convent, once a witness to times of glory and now of silent abandonment, became the stage where our voices came together to restore the lost essence of the divine. Amid every gesture of compassion and every word of faith, we felt the power of prayer that transcends time and pain, filling the air with the promise of healing and transformation. The tears that once symbolized the fragility of our spirits were, at that moment, converted into a seed of hope, germinating in hearts that yearned for a spiritual rebirth. Every look, every touch, was a reaffirmation that, even in the face of the darkest challenges, the light of the divine is never extinguished, but is only renewed through the union of the faithful. I felt that the experience that took me from the brink of death had been transmuted into the certainty that faith, when true, is capable of illuminating the darkest corners and uniting scattered souls in a single purpose. Thus, surrounded by the blessing of a destiny that was unfolding, I committed to being the voice that would take this transformative message to every heart thirsty for redemption, reaffirming that in each prayer lies the key to a future full of light and renewal. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.